Clash Mini has over 10 different heroes to choose from, and today we are gonna find out which one is the absolute best. For the first round, we have the Archer Queen facing off against the Wavemaster. The Queen manages to connect 2 hits before the Wavemaster connects to the Queen. Both the Archer Queen and the Wavemaster charge their super together, but the Wavemaster managed to stun the Queen for 3 seconds with the super and also landed a critical hit on the Queen. The Queen only had her invisibility left to turn the tides, but that wasn't enough, and the Wavemaster charges another super and stun the Queen for additional 3 seconds, and then he lands a final charge hit to finish the Archer Queen. Now that you have seen how the matches work in this tournament, here are the rules for the tournament. The first rule of the tournament is that all the heroes in this tournament are completely maxed out. The second rule is that if a hero is a melee hero, then it will be placed at the front, while if the hero is a ranged hero, it will be placed at the back, giving both of them an equal opportunity. The third rule is that this tournament is in a round robin format, and the hero with the most amount of wins will win the whole tournament. Now for our second game, we have the Barbarian King facing up against the Shield Maiden, and the Shield Maiden starts off strong with the Clash ability, reducing the Barbarian King's damage down to 1. But the Barbarian King needs less energy to charge his super, and so he was the first one to pop off his super and double his DPS. But shortly after that, the Shield Maiden also casts her super, and the Barbarian King is dealing and receiving 2 damage. But since the Shield Maiden wasn't hitting the PK managed to charge his super way faster, and this time with no shield to protect the Shield Maiden, she lost a lot of HP, while the Barbarian King was constantly healing himself. And when the Frenzy mode hits the game, it was game over for the Shield Maiden because of the high DPS of the Barbarian King. In the third round, we have the newest hero in Clash Mini, the Grand Warden, facing off against the Skeleton King. The Grand Warden casts his Clash ability and deals a little damage to the Skeleton King until the Skeleton King reaches to the Grand Warden. After that, even the explosion damage is nothing compared to the insane isolation damage that the Skeleton King can do, and it was game over for the Grand Warden. For the fourth game, we have the Countess facing up against the Monk. Both of the heroes here have very fast hit speed, but since the Countess needs less energy, she gets the super off way quicker, but the super damage is pathetic as compared to 100 damage that the Monk can deal with his super, and it was an easy win for the Monk. For our fifth game, we have the Nichimonne battling up against the Royal Champion, and since the Nichimonne has 2 different forms to choose from, the one with the better result will be chosen, so that you know which form is better against which hero. Against the Royal Champion, the Nichimonne had to switch to the Dio form because it has more HP, deals more damage, and because she's in the melee mode, she's gonna get her super way faster, and the constant healing with the 3 DPS is just what the Nichimonne needs. Even though she never managed to get the overheal off, but that was enough for her to win up against the Royal Champion. These were all the matches for the first round. We had the Archer Queen versus the Wavemaster, where the Wavemaster won with his insane stun capabilities. Then we had the Barbarian King versus Shield Maiden, where the Barbarian King just dealt a lot of damage and healed a lot of HP. For the third game, we had the Grand Warden facing up against the Skeleton King, where the Skeleton King completely dominated the matchup. In game number 4, the Monk straight up slapped the Countess. In game number 5, the Royal Champion brought up a good fight against the Dio form of the Nichimonne, but it has too much HP for the Royal Champion, and she ended up losing the match. Here are the scores after the end of this round. The first match of the second round, we have the Wavemaster facing up against the Shield Maiden. Both of them casted their Clash abilities. While the Wavemaster was useless, Shield Maiden managed to reduce the damage of the Wavemaster down to 1. The Wavemaster lands a charge hit on the Shield Maiden, and that allows her to charge up the super. And she did cast a super, but the Wavemaster super cancelled it out. But with the energy from the super and another charge attack, she got another super up. And that super worked for a little bit before getting cancelled by the Wavemaster super. The game goes down to Frenzy mode, and the Shield Maiden with a pathetic hit speed had no chance to win now and got destroyed by the Wavemaster. In the next game, we have the Grand Warden versus the Barbarian King. The Grand Warden gains some shield and hit speed buff with the Clash ability. The Barbarian King gets the shield down to 2 HP before he casts his first super. Then we see the explosion from the shield, and with high DPS from the Barbarian King, it was game over for the Grand Warden. On our third game, we have the Skeleton King facing off against the Countess. The Skeleton King, with his high DPS and dissipate from the isolation, easily managed to win up against the Countess with 4 hits and a super, and he secured his second win. Next up, we have the Monk facing up against the Royal Champion, and here it was just a waiting game for the Monk to charge his super and finish the Royal Champion with the super. She didn't even manage to hinder the Monk with the stuns, and the Monk easily won his second game. For the final game of the set, we have the Nichimonne versus the Archer Queen. Again, the Nichimonne had to rely on her DF form, but with good damage, high health, and healing from the super, the Nichimonne managed to easily pull off another win too. In set 2, we had the Wavemaster beating the Shield Maiden like a punching bag, then the Barbarian King dominating over the Grand Warden with the help of his good kit. Then the Skeleton King finishes the Countess with 4 hits and a super. Then we saw the monk slapping the royal champion, and finally the nature bond winning up against the archer queen with the help of the deer form. Here are the scores after the end of this round. Starting off the third round, we have the Wave Master facing up against the Grand Warden. The Grand Warden gets off his Clash ability, but then the Wave Master stuns the Grand Warden with the super and lands a charge tag, breaking the Grand Warden's shield, causing explosion damage and +1 damage. But that was not enough to top off all the stuns and the heals of the Wave Master, and at the end the Wave Master ended up winning the game against the Grand Warden with the help of the Frenzy mode. For the second game, we have the Countess facing up against the Barbarian King. Here the Countess deals more damage than the Barbarian King. She hits faster, and because of her anti-heal on the super, she never allowed the Barbarian King to heal himself. The Barbarian King did manage to delay the game a little bit with the invincibility, but at the end it was not enough to defeat the Countess. For the third game, it's the Skeleton King facing up against the Royal Champion. The Skeleton King, again with the energy absorption and good DPS, managed to get the win against the Royal Champion without breaking a single sweat against the Royal Champion. For the fourth game, we have the Monk facing up against the Archer Queen. Since the Queen has quite fast of a hit speed, the Monk quickly managed to charge up his super, and he didn't even allow the Queen to use her invincibility, and it was an easy win for the Monk. For the final game of the set, we have the Shield Maiden facing up against the Nature Bond, and again the Nature Bond had to rely on her Deer form, especially because the Deer form has the power to penetrate through the shield of the Shield Maiden. And because of Shield Maiden's pathetic DPS, she even managed to get an overheal, which is insane value because it ramps up her damage to 6. The shield did resist some of the damage, but she was feeling it, and with another super from the Nature Bond, it was a GG's well played for the Shield Maiden. But here, even the human form barely lost by an HP. Round number 3, we saw the Wave Master dominating over the Grand Warden with his great kit. Then we saw the Countess anti-healing and good DPS manage to pull up a win against the Barbarian King. Next up, it was the Skeleton King and the Monk showing total dominance against the Archer Queen and the Royal Champion. And finally, Nature Bond used her Deer form to win against the Shield Maiden. Here are the scores after the end of this round. For the fourth round, we will kick things up with the Wave Master versus the Barbarian King matchup. Both of these heroes have similar DPS, where the Wave Master can get some stunts while the Barbarian King can double his DPS, and the Wave Master lands a charge attack, charges his super, and then uses his super and heals a little bit. Then the Barbarian King gets off his super and again gets stunned by the Wave Master, and Wave Master lands another super. The Barbarian King gets off another super, and so does the Wave Master. But in the end, the Barbarian King with more healing and DPS gets an edge over the Wave Master's stun. Second game, we see Countess facing up against the Royal Champion. Both of these heroes traded up some blows at the start, but the Countess then deals 8 damage with her super and heals herself. After that, the Countess casts a super dealing 12 damage and a little stun. But then she let the Countess cook another super, and that made the Royal Champion go down to 1 HP and win the game for the Countess. Game 3, we have the Skeleton King facing up against the Archer Queen. The Skeleton King lands up 2 hard hits with isolation activated on the Queen, and then charges up his super from the absorption energy, and this makes the Queen turn invisible, but that was worthless because of the stun, and then Skeleton King secures his another win. For the fourth game, we have the Monk facing up against the Shield Maiden. Here the Monk quickly charges up his super, and well, that 100 damage is too much even for the most tankiest hero in the game. Also, the Shield Maiden Clash ability was completely useless in this case, so poor girl just got wrecked. For the final game of this set, we have the Grand Warden facing up against the Nature Bond, and here the Grand Warden gets off his shield with his Clash ability, and that shield allowed him to tank some of the hits from the Nature Bond. But once the shield is taken care of, there is nothing that he can do, and the Nature Bond was slowly but surely taking him down. On the other hand, the Nature Bond slowly healing herself, and when certain death hits the game, it was game over for the Grand Warden, and the Nature Bond shows her victory dance. Set 4, we had a close battle between the Wave Master and the Barbarian King, where the Barbarian King ended up being victorious. Next up, we saw 3 one-sided battles with the Countess, Monk and the Skeleton King. Finishing up, we had the slow battle between the Nature Bond and the Grand Warden, where she managed to win up the game with the help of the human form. Here are the scores after the end of this round. Starting off round number 5, we have the Barbarian King versus the Royal Champion. The Barbarian King has a good kit, and that is going to carry him. He starts off with a super, doubling his DPS. Following that, the Royal Champion also casts a super, dealing 12 damage. But the Barbarian King with the passive healing managed to overcome the damage dealt by the super, and before the Royal Champion could use the second super, it was already over. Next up, we have the Countess versus the Archer Queen. The Archer Queen charges up the super for the Countess, and then the Countess deals 8 damage while healing herself, and then she lands a few hits on the Archer Queen before she turned invisible. Finally, after the invisibility ran out, she casted another super, and with couple more hits, it was an easy win for the Countess. For the third game, we had the Skeleton King facing up against the Shield Maiden, and I'ma be honest, this was simply the Skeleton King using the Shield Maiden as a punching bag, because for the entire game, the thing literally did nothing. For game number 4, we had the Grand Warden facing up against the Monk, and remember what I said a couple seconds ago? Well, the Monk also treated the Grand Warden as a literal punching bag, and both of them easily managed to win 5 of their games. The final game of this set, we had the Natureborn facing up against the Waymaster, and here the Waymaster got some good stuns at the start of the game, but as the round progressed, it wasn't about who's gonna stun more, it was about who's gonna heal more, and that sector is completely dominated by the Natureborn, and at the end with decent damage, great healings and high HP, the DF form managed to win up against the Waymaster. In round 5, we saw the Barbarian King showing the power of a skit against the Royal Champion and win the first game. For our second game, we saw the Countess stabbing the Archer Queen and taking that dub. In game number 3 and game number 4, we saw what being a punching bag really means by the Monk and the Skeleton King. Finally, in a close game between the DF form and the Waymaster, the DF form was victorious with his strong healings. Here are the scores after the end of this round. We will start round number 5 with the King versus Queen matchup. Here the Barbarian King simply has an overall great kit, too much HP and healing for the Queen to take care of. But she really tried her best with the invisibility, but she didn't manage to make up, and the Barbarian King came out on top. In the second game, we had the Countess versus the Shield Maiden. Here the Countess deals a lot of damage while the Shield Maiden has a pathetic DPS. She did try to utilize her shield, but the Countess just kept on healing herself, and here that was enough for the Countess to be victorious. In game number 3, we had the Monk facing up against the Waymaster. Both of them used their clash abilities, which were completely useless, and then both of them charged their super almost together, but before casting the super, the Waymaster landed a charge attack, and that stun did hinder the Monk for a little while, but he didn't manage to cast up his super, and so the Monk thought it's Monkin time, and simply he finished the Waymaster with one attack. In game number 4, we saw the Royal Champion up against the Grand Warden. The Grand Warden cast his clash abilities, and then both of them traded some blows with each other, and once the shield was taken care of, the Royal Champion uses a super, and after a few more hits, she claimed her victory against the Grand Warden. The final game of this set, we had the Natureborn facing up against the Skeleton King, and here regardless of what form the Natureborn picked, she would end up losing because of the sheer power of isolation from the Skeleton King was too much for anyone to take care of. Round 6, we saw the King dominating over the Queen with his great kit and survival capabilities. Then we had the Countess, which overwhelmed the Shield Maiden with his high DPS. Next up was the Monk, finishing up the Waymaster with a palm strike. Game number 4, we saw the Royal Champion throwing her shield and winning the game against the Grand Warden. And finally, the Skeleton King was too strong for Natureborn to switch any form. Here are the scores after the end of this round. We will start round number 7 with an Archer Queen versus Grand Warden matchup. Here the Grand Warden casted his shield at the start of the match, and once the shield was taken care of by the Archer Queen, the explosion damage was completely wasted, but the +1 damage seemed to even up the matchup. Well, until the Queen turned invisible and just annihilated the Grand Warden. For the second game of this set, we saw the Royal Champion versus the Shield Maiden. The Shield Maiden reduced the damage of the Royal Champion down to 2, which was still good for the Royal Champion, and then she used a super on the Shield Maiden. That stun did charge the Shield Maiden super, and once the shield was taken care of by the Royal Champion, she used another super, and with this super the Shield Maiden was close to getting KO'd, but she casted another super, but because of how reflection damage works, the Shield Maiden was taken down while the Royal Champion with a super was still healthy. Game number 3, we had the Monk facing up against the Natureborn, and again, regardless of what form the Natureborn picked, she would end up losing in 6 seconds to be precise. On the other hand, Monk took another win on his bag. Game number 4, we saw the Skeleton King facing up against the Barbarian King, and again, with the sheer power of the isolation, we saw the Barbarian King being treated like a punching bag, but because of the invincibility and a good chunk of health, he managed to survive way longer than the other contestants. For the final game of this set, we had the Waymaster fighting against the Countess. We saw some intense combat between the two of them. While one side the Waymaster kept on stunning the Countess used the anti-heal to counter Waymaster's healing, and that little more DPS was enough for the Countess to get an extra edge over the Waymaster, and she ended up being victorious. For a recap, we saw the Archer Queen winning over the Grand Warden with her invisibility. Next up, we saw the Royal Champion winning over the Shield Maiden with some lucky supers. Next up, we saw the Monk and the Skeleton King dominating over their opponents. And finally, we saw some intense combat between the Waymaster and the Countess, where the Countess came out on top. Here are the scores after the end of this round. Round 8 starts off with the Archer Queen versus Royal Champion matchup. Both of them started by trading some blows with each other. Then the Queen gets a super, while the poor girl Royal Champion did charge a super, but the Queen turned invisible. And that invisibility was too long that the final projectile managed to take down the Royal Champion, giving the win to the Archer Queen. Next up, we saw the Nature Bond versus Countess matchup. And well, the Countess kit simply is designed to counter the Nature Bond because of the main gimmick of Nature Bond being the healing, which can't be used in this matchup because of the anti-heal. And regardless of what form the Nature Bond took, it was an L for her while the Countess continues to dominate on the table. Next up, we saw a Shield Maiden versus Grand Warden matchup, and here because of how rounding off works in Clash Mini, Shield Maiden's Clash ability turned out to be completely useless. But that wasn't concerning because she quickly managed to get the shield up, and once that was gone, the Grand Warden shield was taken down too. The explosion damage did tickle the Shield Maiden, but it was pathetic for Shield Maiden's high HP, and at the end with the sudden death, Shield Maiden stood victorious. Our next match is between the Monk and the Barbarian King. The Monk quickly charges super by trading hits with the Barbarian King, and once the super was charged, the Barbarian King was left at 1 HP with invincibility. But it didn't do much because he was stunned for the entire time, and as soon as the bubble was gone, it was Monk in time. For the final game of this set, we saw Skeleton King versus the Waymaster matchup. Again, the Skeleton King turned on his isolation and dissipate. From there was no coming back. The Waymaster did try to stun him twice with the charge deck, but it was nowhere near close to winning, and Skeleton King again took up the win. Here are the scores after the end of this round. Starting up the final set, we have the Shield Maiden versus the Archer Queen matchup. In an ideal world, Shield Maiden is supposed to counter the Archer Queen, which she was doing an excellent job at the start. But when the Queen turned invisible, she dealt a ton of damage to the Shield Maiden. And when the game reached Frenzy mode, the Queen ramped up, while the Shield Maiden barely lost by 1 HP. In the second game, we have the Grand Warden facing up against the Countess. The Grand Warden turned on his shield, the Countess quickly managed to take it down. The explosion damage was something, but with another super, the Countess did recover from the explosion damage, and at this point, the Grand Warden was left hopeless. For our third game, we saw the Royal Champion facing the Waymaster. Both of them traded some hits at the start. Then the Waymaster lands a charge attack, stunning the Royal Champion for 1 second, then another super for a stun of plus 3 seconds. Then the Royal Champion did use a super for a good chunk of damage, but after that the Waymaster lands another charge hit and then a super. And then they traded some more hits, and the Waymaster finally finishes the game with another charge hit. Game number 4, we have the Nature Bond facing against the Barbarian King. Both of these heroes are pretty similar with each other, where both can heal, deal double damage and have similar HP. But because of our inconsistent Nature Bond's damage buff is, when the clock hits the Frenzy mode, Barbarian King started to dominate the matchup and ended up being victorious. The final game of the tournament, we have the Skeleton King facing up against the Monk. Both of these heroes haven't lost a single game yet, but in the final game, because of how stupid Skeleton King's isolation is, he easily managed to win up against the Monk. Coming in dead last with 0 wins, we have the Grand Warden, which is understandable considering he is a support hero. Coming in 9th place, we have the Shield Maiden with 1 win. This shows us how having a lot of HP isn't really the only requirement for winning. The 8th rank is secured by the Royal Champion with 2 wins, and the main reason is that she didn't use her main gimmick of chaining supers. Coming at 7th place, we have the Archer Queen with 3 wins, which is understandable because she isn't designed to take early combats. Coming at 6th place, we have the Wavemaster with 4 wins, which is understandable because the Wavemaster's main goal is to survive for longer and not to just win 1v1 interactions. At 5th place, we have the Nature Bond with 5 wins. Here the Dio form literally carried the Nature Bond, and this shows us how the Dio form can be so good at the start of the battle. With 6 wins, at the 4th place, we have the Barbarian King. With high HP, high DPS and a great kit in general, the Barbarian King manages to secure the 4th placement. At 3rd place, with 7 wins, we have the Countess, and the Countess is designed to assassinate enemy units, and so she did a great job in this test. Coming at 2nd place with 8 wins, we have the Monk, and the Monk is designed to target very specific targets, and here the Monk did a great job in this tournament. But coming at the 1st place, we have the Skeleton King with his insane isolation power. He just single-handedly carried the entire tournament.